Welcome, everyone. We will get started in just a moment. Welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for today's Lunch and Learn, the big role of small-scale farms in environmental conservation with Sustainable Harvest International. Climate change and loss of biodiversity threaten the very existence of the human race. While professors and policymakers study, debate, and try to forge agreement, campesinos with little money or education are stabilizing the climate, bringing biodiversity back to degraded lands, and feeding the world. Florence Reed is here to introduce some of these unsung heroes working with Sustainable Harvest International, the nonprofit organization she founded back in 1997 to work with rural Central American communities to implement sustainable farming practices and to preserve tropical forests. Florence is passionate about helping the world's farmers live better while regenerating the planet. And she practices that agroecology here in Maine as well. She lives in Surrey with her family in a home they built with primarily local materials, and they are close to reaching their goal of being fossil fuel independent, and they also grow much of their own food. Florence has been featured in painter Rob Shetterly's portrait series, Americans Who Tell the Truth, and we are delighted to welcome her here today. My name is Kathleen Neal. I am the Director of Policy and Partnerships here at Maine Conservation Voters and Maine Conservation Alliance. Our organizations represent more than 13,000 members and supporters dedicated to protecting Maine's environment and our democracy. MCA does that through education, collaboration, and advocacy, and MCV by influencing public policy, holding politicians accountable, and winning elections. A few technical notes for today. We'll hear from Florence first and then tackle your questions in the Q&A session at the end. You don't have to wait, though. You can send your questions to me through the chat whenever they occur to you, and I'll keep track to ask them all after the presentation. We ask that you not message our speaker directly, as we want her to be able to focus on the presentation, not the chat box. Please message Will Sedlak if you have any technical difficulties. This event is being recorded, and the video will be posted on our website later this afternoon, where you can also find recordings of all of our previous Lunch and Learns. Thank you again for joining us, and Florence, I will turn it over to you to kick things off.
I'll try to unmute myself and not turn off my video instead. Thank you so much. It's really great to be able to be here with this group. I love the work of Maine Conservation Voters, and the older I get, the more I appreciate the importance of policy and that side of environmental work. And I actually got my start with an early job with a League of Conservation Voters, so somewhat similar as well. But I will jump in. I have a presentation here, so I will do a screen share. And I will start. There we go. Is the screen share working all right?
Sure
Okay.
is.
All right, excellent. So I'm here today to talk about farming, and so I'll ask everybody to start out just taking a moment and think about, when you think about farming, what's the image that comes to your mind? I know for me, for a long time, and maybe still today to some degree, the image that I get is something a little bit like this, which we all might like to think is where our food comes from. And maybe for many of us who are very thoughtful about where we buy our food, it's close to the reality. For most of the world, though, our food system does not look so much like this, but rather looks more like this, with a very complicated web of external inputs being shipped around the world, and food produced and shipped around the world, and manufactured and shipped around the world, and grown by corporations, some grown by small scale farmers. There's of course finance involved. It's got a lot of moving pieces, and then a lot of impacts as well. Impacts on the environment, impacts on the people growing the food, impacts on the people eating the food. With my work, I'm particularly focused on the global South and Central America, where Sustainable Harvest International works, and focused on the farming there, which is to a great extent done by smallholder farmers that are farming just a few acres. And in most cases, they're using slash and burn farming, a traditional type of farming that was probably sustainable at one time, but not so much anymore usually. Or maybe they're using agrochemicals to try to produce some more crops on their land. But in either case, it's leading to degradation of the land, eventually to the point where the yields decrease and no longer sustain the families. In both cases, it's adding to biodiversity loss, to climate chaos, to other environmental issues. And then when not enough crops are able to be grown to even feed the families growing them, of course, it leads to hunger and to poverty, which then lead people to feel forced out of their communities, off their land, into cities where life is even harder in many ways, or maybe trying to migrate to the US to try to find work here, to try to send money home, when really in almost all cases, these farming families would like to continue to be farming families and staying in their communities. And so that's what Sustainable Harvest is focused on. That's the depressing part of the presentation. I promise it will get more hopeful from here on out, I hope. And starting with the fact that I believe these smallholder farmers can play a very significant role in helping to stabilize the climate by shifting away from these degenerative practices to instead using agroforestry and other regenerative agroecology practices, organic practices that sequester carbon in the soil, sequester carbon in the trees, and the other permanent crops. And so this is the type of farming that Sustainable Harvest International promotes and helps farmers to adopt. It's called sustainable agriculture, it's called regenerative agriculture, it's called agroecology and organic farming. And there can be lots of debates over what each one means and whether they're the same. But the basic principles as laid out here are the ones that we adhere to in our program of minimizing soil disturbance, so low till or no till, maximizing crop diversity, keeping the soil covered with plants or with mulches, maintaining living roots year round, so that there's always something growing on the land. It's not bare, and then also integrating to some degree some livestock in as you would have in nature. So it's really following the way nature grows things. And we focus on the world's smallholder farmers in part because they feed 70% of the world, despite the fact they are working under very difficult conditions, and in part because they tend to be the most ready to easily make the shift to agroecology practices. Unlike conventional farms, who also, I think, need to and are thankfully starting to make this shift to more ecological farming practices, The smallholders don't have millions of dollars invested in conventional farming practices. So for them, it's a fairly easy decision to move away from farming practices that harm the environment to move to farming practices that benefit the environment, because those same farming practices that benefit the environment also benefit the farmers in the global south, in places like Central America where sustainable harvest works. We've seen it over and over again for 25 years that these organic ecological practices produce more for the farming families. And in recent years, we're also now seeing more and more studies coming out with data from thousands of farms, not millions of farms around the world, showing statistics such as an 80% increase in yields with organic practices in the global south as compared to conventional farming practices. So that's why sustainable harvest helps smallholder farmers to shift to regenerative agroecology practices. And just to give an example of how the program works, I thought I'd share the story of one family with you. This is Santos Lorenzo and his wife Maria Hernandez and two of their three children. They live in the community of San Juanito in Panama, in the Coclé province in Panama. They have graduated from our program at this point, but they joined the program because they had grown up doing slash and burn farming, seen how the yields were diminishing, how it wasn't enough to even always feed their families, not to mention have enough money to go to high school or pay for healthcare or better housing or anything like that. And they saw that there weren't a lot of other alternatives for them. One was working on plantations in the area that were using a lot of chemicals that are actually illegal in this country because they're so toxic. And the people working on the farms were getting sick, were dying, their children were being born with birth defects. So it didn't seem like a very good option. And when Santos and Maria saw the opportunity to start producing on their own land and sustain themselves on their own land, it was a pretty easy decision for them. And so they signed on to work with our program for what was then a 5-year program. We're now consolidated it to a 4-year program, but it's broken into 5 phases that each family goes through, working primarily with a local trainer that we hire and support in their work with approximately 30 families. And the first phase of the work is really just getting to know each other. We explain what we offer, which is mostly technical assistance, very little material assistance, and what we expect from the families, which is to dedicate at least a portion of their land to trying the ecological practices that we share. And then plans are built out together. So the family together with the field trainer talk about what each family wants to accomplish. And each family actually draws a picture of what their land looks like when they're starting and what they'd like it to look like eventually. And then that serves as a guide for the rest of their work with us and their continuing work after that. And then it's an ongoing process of knowledge sharing, building on the tremendous knowledge that all the families already have, and then adding new pieces, particularly focused on regenerative agroecology practices. And the next phase is really the heart of the program, where families learn new sustainable farming techniques and how to improve their nutrition. Usually when they join the program, they're growing 2 or 3 crops. And by the time they finish, they're growing 20, 30, as many as 40 different crops, which is, of course, very beneficial for the environment, but also benefits the family's diets as they're able to have more fruits and vegetables in their diet and use the different crops to support a healthy ecosystem on the farm. So for instance, in this case, this is lemongrass. It's growing along a contour, so it's stopping erosion of the soil. And it's also helping to keep insects away that don't like the smell of the lemongrass. And this is one of the techniques. So I guess I didn't really mention what was going on in the pictures on the previous slide, but that's Santos with their worm composting bins. And so that's one of the ways that the families build up the health of the soil, which then builds up the health of the crops. So they use worm composting, bokashi, fermented composting. There's composting latrines. There's just pile it up and let it rot type of composting. There's cover crops. There's mulch. There's all these different ways to build up healthy soils, which at the same time, because it's putting organic material into the soil, it's also drawing down carbon out of the atmosphere and putting that carbon back into the soil and helping to stabilize the climate. The third phase of the program starts to focus more specifically on the environment. This is often when the tree planting piece comes in, and families plant fruit trees, hardwood trees, spice trees, nut trees. They grow shrubs like coffee or cacao growing in the shade of some of these trees. There might be trees for fodder, for firewood. Most of the trees with a benefit to the family, financial or food. Sometimes it's just for the overall health of the farm and for the benefit of a healthy ecosystem, for the benefit of local wildlife. But in that way, the families, again, are drawing down a lot more carbon out of the atmosphere, and it's being stored in these trees as they grow, and even in many cases after if they're harvested for wood products, it's still being stored in that wood. So this is Santos and Maria's farm. Again, you can see some of the lemongrass there. They've got bananas. They've got fruit trees here. Over here, these are pigeon peas, which are legumes, so they put more nitrogen in the soil as well. And this is a big piece of the environmental element of the work. And also during this phase, the families start to get a little bit of training, if they want, on how to think of their farm more as a business, and look at markets for crops, and which crops have better markets, and start focusing on earning some more income from their farm, as well as producing more to feed themselves well. And through this, many of the families find that where they used to see nature as something to be sort of conquered or suppressed in order to do well for themselves, they come to see it as their ally in farming, and develop a real love of nature and the biodiversity of what they're growing, and the nature that comes back to the farms as well. So this is Maria sitting in front of their house, and when I visited this time, I was really happy to see that they had put up a lot of different posters about the wildlife in the area, which actually does start to come back as the families take this more environmental approach to farming. The fourth phase of the program builds out more of that business development. So the families are earning more income by farming in a way that's benefiting the environment. In the case of Santos and Maria and their family, they were able to earn enough, and I would say maybe also gain enough confidence that they saw a way to get beyond. They'd been living in a house that had wattle and daub, like sort of mud walls and dirt floor, and palm roof, which is very ecologically sustainable, but it also lets in snakes and other problematic pests and things. And they wanted something a little bit better than that, and they were able to save up enough and develop enough self-confidence, I think, to go and find a government program that matched funds with them, and they were able to build a new house for themselves. And so this is their new house. That was one of the goals they had when they joined the program, was to increase their income enough to get a new house. And there it is, right about the time that they moved into it. And the last phase of the program that the families go through with us is just really getting them ready to graduate from the program, to be able to continue on their own without further assistance from us. And also some skills in sharing what they've learned with others, so that this will be spread throughout the community. And as the families do better, their neighbors do want to find out what they're doing and get in on it. And so many of the families do go on to share what they've learned with others. Their children also pick this up. In the case of Santos and Maria, the two younger children that you saw in that earlier picture, they both had been intending to study business and probably move to the city to look for work there, because they didn't see a future in farming. When they saw how things were starting to shift on their family's farm, they changed that. They decided to study agriculture, and they're planning on continuing farming the way their parents are farming now. And so that continues on. We go back once in a while to visit the families after they've graduated. So this was 4 years after Santos and Maria graduated from the program, where they were continuing to do even better than when they were receiving assistance from us, continuing to add more crops, plant more trees. They put in new erosion barriers, building up terraces so that the soil doesn't wash down into the stream at the other end of the property. And we expect this to continue on for generations, for the benefit of the family, but also for the benefit of the local wildlife, the drawdown of carbon to help to stabilize the climate, protection of water sources, and so on. And I took a little video of Maria talking about this that I'd like to share. Good morning. My name is Maria Purificación Hernandez, and I feel very content because Sustainable Harvest has brought joy to me, a home for my children, for my house. They've also taught us many good things that we didn't know before, to work with a garden, with everything organic like charcoal, ash, with plants. I tell my husband, I tell him that I hope God wants to give me the strength to earn more money, to be able to buy all of that, so I can plant things like orange trees, mango trees, papaya trees, and other natural trees, so the little animals can eat and enjoy themselves, because I'd like to see lots of little animals, chachalacas, toucans, doves. I feel happy because all kinds of birds come that we had never seen. Monkeys. You see monkeys pass by at night. One they call puhuna, or night monkey. And I feel, well, I tell myself I want to plant it all so that there will be food for the animals and for us. So that's Maria. And that's one family who has been through the Sustainable Harvest program. Over the last 25 years, we've worked with more than 3,000 smallholder farmers, such as Santos and Maria's family, most of whom have now graduated from the program. There's approximately 500 that are currently in the program in Panama, where Maria and Santos are, and in Honduras and in Belize. And we also worked in Nicaragua for a time. Collectively, these 3,000 families have planted 4 million trees on their farms and restored over 26,000 acres of previously degraded land. And of course, it's also benefiting them with improved income and improved diets and improved health. So we're really happy to see that change for those 3,000 families and on those 26,000 acres. But what we're thinking about now is the fact that there are 500 million smallholder farmers in the world, similar to Santos and Maria's family. And we feel that the majority of them are ready and willing to make the shift to ecological farming practices that can benefit all of us, particularly in the face of climate change and biodiversity loss. So now Sustainable Harvest is making a shift from trying to raise a little more money to work with a few more families to a new scaling vision to try to play a leadership role in making that shift possible for those 500 million smallholder families. And we are doing this in great part because we see the potential there that if all 500 million smallholder farmers make this shift, they would be able to draw down 8 gigatons of CO2 per year, which is about 53% of the goal that the United Nations has set for net greenhouse gas reductions. This is a win-win. Nobody's being asked to give up anything. It's actually benefiting the families that are ready and willing to do the work. What they need is the technical assistance. Of course, there is a cost to that. And so I've calculated out what I think that would cost to take a program like ours to all 500 million of those smallholder farmers, and calculated that it would cost around $300 billion per year for 4 years to do that. So a pretty hefty number for an organization like ours with a budget under $2 million. But obviously we don't plan to do this alone. And it does seem to me that it should be possible. This cartoon is not quite accurate, well, depending on what they were illustrating, but the world's governments actually collectively spend about $600 billion per year on agriculture. And the 600 billion that's mostly subsidizing the type of farming that degrades the environment. So if some of that could be shifted to instead allowing farmers to make the shift that they want to make to ecological farming practices, then we could achieve some very big environmental goals, as well as benefiting so many of the farmers and producing healthier food for people eating it as well. So that's what the 600 billion is what the world's governments are currently spending. I also just took a look recently at US foreign aid, which is not a whole, I mean, some people think we spend a lot of government funding on foreign aid. Overall, it's about 0.1% of, no, excuse me, it's a little under 1% that the US government spends on foreign aid. And of that, 0.1% goes to the environment. So I think there's room to be doing a lot more in that regard. And I think other governments are also seeing the potential. And so I think that with the right connections, we'll be seeing them make a shift. As an example, I just started as a thought exercise. I took a look at the country of Colombia and figured that they now spend about 1.6 billion per year on agriculture, forestry, and fishing. If they spent about half of that over the course of 4 years on a program such as ours, they would be able to provide food security and a better standard of living for all of the rural poor in their country, and also reach 56% of their greenhouse gas reduction goal that they've registered with the UN. So this is the kind of thing that Sustainable Harvest is focused on now. We've recently launched a new scaling up initiative that we're calling the Million Farm Transformation, with a big audacious goal to restore 8 million acres of land on 1 million farms that that support 5 million people. And we are doing this with a 3-pronged approach. First, we're expanding our direct work with farmers. Second, we're testing out innovations to bring down the cost of delivering the technical assistance. And then the third and most important one is we're looking to partner with larger organizations, with businesses and with government agencies, with whom we can reach much larger numbers of farms and collectively get to this 1 million farm goal. And so that's the direction that we're headed now, with the idea that these 1 million farms can play a significant role in leading the way for all 500 million smallholder farms around the world. And welcome you to find some more information about that. We've got a scaling webpage, millionfarmtransformation.org, and then Sustainable Harvest, of course, has our website and our social media as well. So I hope that I've timed that right to leave plenty of time to hear your thoughts and your questions, and I'll stop sharing my screen.
Florence, this is just amazing. I mean, amazing work. And thank you for that incredible presentation. I kept jotting down questions that you would answer in the next sentence. So thank you.
Excellent.
For everybody on the call now, you will get later this afternoon a follow-up email that has a link to this recording, and also a link to find out more about Sustainable Harvest International, to join the email list. I highly recommend it. It is full of great stories and really important updates. And you can also think a little bit about how to apply these principles here at home. So that may look like buying food from regenerative farms here in Maine. A little bit of a tongue twister, but you get the idea. It may look like supporting organizations like SHI that are helping farms transition to regenerative methods. I am really tongue-tied today. And then, of course, this is our bread and butter, right? It means encouraging elected officials to change the way our policies and our financial incentives are set up, so that we really can shift towards supporting agroecology on the global scale. So you'll get all of those little tidbits this afternoon. And right now, let's dig into your questions. So you can keep those coming to me through the chat anytime. And we've got a good bunch to start with. Florence, SHI is just such an incredible organization. Will you tell us a little bit more about the origin story? How did this come about? What an amazing thing to have conceived and brought to such a powerful implementation. How'd you do it?
All right, well, see if I can do this quickly. The very short answer would be that I was a Peace Corps volunteer. And so I lived in a rural community in Panama and got to see firsthand the issues being faced by the farmers and the connection to the environment, which were things that I studied in college as well. And a slightly longer piece of getting it started was after Peace Corps, I worked for a couple of other nonprofits. And one of those turned out it wasn't really doing what it said it was doing. And I ended up in the position where I felt like if the work was really going to happen and continue, that I was going to need to start my own nonprofit. So when this other organization told me I should just raise money and not worry about what got done with it, I said, well, I think I better resign. And I thought, can I start a new nonprofit? I've got limited experience and skills and no money, and probably not. And I told myself, all right, you can take the next day to think about it and see if you can come up with a plan. And if not, then you've just got to face reality and go get a real job and pay your bills. And my mother helpfully pointed out that if I liked warm weather and Spanish-speaking people, I could work at Disney World in Florida, which wasn't quite what I had in mind. But on that exact day, I got an email from a man in Switzerland who I'd met on my last trip to Central America. He wrote and asked how things were going and whether I was working things out with the problems I'd been having with this other organization. And I wrote back and said, here's the situation. And he said, oh, well, open a bank account for your new organization and I'll wire you some money. And he's about my age. So I thought, what could he send? $20. But he sent $6,000 the next day. No, excuse me, $3,000. The next year he upped it to $6,000. But anyway, $3,000 the next day, which was enough to keep me going the first 3 months and keep the first 2 guys hired in Honduras going for the first few months. And then kind of building it out from there, reaching out to everybody I knew, everybody my parents knew, to get more donations coming to slowly build it out, using a spare bedroom at my parents' house as the world headquarters until we could afford an actual office. So that's
incredible. And I love that fate. What a beautiful thing.
I think it was meant to be.
So how many people are part of the SHI team now?
We have a virtual headquarters with about 8 staff, mostly in the US. A couple of the headquarters staff are based in Latin America as well. And then we have just under 30 Central Americans who work for Sustainable Harvest Panama, Sustainable Harvest Honduras, and Sustainable Harvest Belize.
And I really appreciate that sort of thought exercise and also the math of how you would scale up to meet that million farm challenge. Does that work, in your sort of perfect world, and does that work all happen through Sustainable Harvest International, or are there dozens of SHIs, and are those organizations out there now, or what's the best path?
SHI's scaling vision for the million farm transformation, SHI would have a hand in reaching those million farms, but in most cases, we wouldn't do it all ourselves or do it directly necessarily. We would do it by co-creating programs with others. So for instance, in Belize, we've been working with the agriculture ministry there, starting to do some workshops for them. Ideally, we'd like to see that grow into a situation where that country's extension program reinvented itself, partnering with us to look more like the Sustainable Harvest program, and in that way reach most of the smallholder farmers in Belize. And we're also speaking with some businesses and government agencies in Honduras and some government agencies in Panama. So that's kind of the way that we would see the million farm transformation happening. And at the same time, thankfully, there's more and more others getting involved in this type of work. So it would be our hope that we would be sharing with each other, learning from each other, supporting each other, and collectively reaching the 500 million smallholder farmers around the world. It used to feel like we were pretty much the only ones doing this, but thankfully we're in good company now, and there seems to be growing attention to the potential for agroecology.
It's just incredible. I mean, what a thing to have kicked off and to be able to watch it all unfolding. Remind me, how do you define a smallholder farm? How big is that?
There's no official definition of it. In the Sustainable Harvest Program, the average farm size is about 8 acres. And most of them, I think that might be skewed a little bit by a few big farms we had in Nicaragua for a while. So probably more like 5 acres is about what the typical farm is for Sustainable Harvest. I think others would define smallholder farms as going up to 10 or more acres, but not the farms that are many hundreds or thousands of acres.
Yeah, and what a completely different project that is, to run a 5-acre farm versus 100,000 bigger.
Yeah.
Are those smallholder farms, are those folks feeding themselves? Are they feeding their communities? How far does that reach?
They're doing both. I mean, usually the farmers, when they're coming into our program, they're growing food primarily to feed themselves, and usually are not growing enough to feed themselves a really balanced diet or to feed themselves 3 meals a day all year. And so that's a first priority for us, is to help them grow the food to feed themselves well, and then secondarily to grow more that can be sold so that they have income to pay for other things like healthcare and education and housing and so on. One of my gripes with a lot of programs, particularly bigger ones, government sponsored ones, is when when either they're giving food to people who could be growing it for themselves, and then when it runs out, they're back where they started, or they're encouraging the farmers to grow a commodity crop to sell and then to use the money to buy food that's coming from somewhere else. And to my mind, that doesn't work well for the environment, and it doesn't work well for the families as compared to growing food to feed themselves. If the crop fails and they're growing one thing that they're counting on, then they don't have that income. They can't buy food. Not to mention, monocultures, of course, are not good for the environment for the most part. And yeah, so that's
And of course,
one of the soapboxes that I'll
yeah,
get on.
no, I love it. I love it. And of course, that what you're talking about, that's the way the world has worked for most of history, right? Most of human history. It has
Yes.
not been large monoculture
Right.
commodity crops that we exchange on the market, right? It is
Yes.
it is about feeding yourself first, and then
growing some extra to feed
yeah,
people in your community. And yeah, and I'm not saying that we can't have any crops grown for export. I want my chocolate up here in Maine, and I'm willing to sacrifice some of my principles for that. But for the most part, I feel like people can and should be able to feed themselves from either their own land or from farms in their nearby vicinity.
do you have any sense of how many farms in the United States would fall into that under 5-acre smallholder category? Is that a thing that we still have in this country?
We certainly do have it. I don't have the statistic. I'm not confident enough to give that, but we certainly do. And I think Maine is one of the leaders in that regard. It's one of the reasons I love living where I do here in Hancock County, but I think it's probably true in most of Maine as well, that we don't have to look too far to find these small scale farms that are producing a tremendous amount of healthy food in a way that's benefiting the environment.
And I know you're doing that at home, right? How does your home farm compare to the farms you're working with through Sustainable Harvest?
Compares very poorly in terms of production, and in other regards, I tend to not put the time into it that it would require to.
You do have some other things, I'm getting the sense.
I do, but
do.
I do use all the practices that we promote, and grow a good amount for our family to eat, and then buy as much of the rest as possible from other farms in the area, which we're lucky to have.
Yes, it is true. There's nothing like a Maine farmers market. So
Yes.
that counts.
Yes.
But it's clearly not enough, right? So you talked a little bit about some of the policy changes that could support taking this bigger, right? Taking this worldwide and really helping lots and lots of, say, for example, 1 million farms. just to pull a number out of the air.
Yeah.
What do you think we need to do, and where are the opportunities? How can this group kind of look for opportunities to weigh in, and what should we be asking for with policymakers?
Yeah, we've got some great policymakers here in Maine, thankfully, but if we're talking to them, I just think we can really encourage them to, of course, support the smallholders here in Maine, which I think is happening to a good degree, but we could always do more, but also to think about it in terms of foreign aid. And if they're thinking about things like migration issues, however the money's being spent to address those issues, think about using it to help families sustain themselves on their land, if that's where they want to be, and do it in a way that's going to benefit our environment as well, rather than treating the problems after they arise. And in terms of climate change, instead of looking for new technologies or machines or something like that, I mean, we do need to approach climate change from a variety of different ways, but it seems like low-hanging fruit can be supporting the farmers that want to shift to a type of food system and farming system that will address a big part of the climate change issue, although not all of it. So I think just making sure that our elected officials are aware and are encouraged to promote that sort of work, and not promote foreign aid that's giving more agrochemicals to farmers, agrochemicals that heat the climate in their production, in their use, in their degradation of soils, and in the fact that they're used instead of putting more organic material and carbon into the soils.
And did you say at the beginning of the presentation that some of those chemicals are actually, they're illegal in this country, but we're supporting their?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I think they're pretty much all problematic. But I was referencing in that instance pesticides, many of which have been banned in this country because they're so toxic. Although I think we still are using toxic ones in this country, but the most toxic ones in many cases have been banned here. And then when they get banned here, the companies go and sell them instead in places like Central America, where farmers maybe are less likely to understand the health dangers. In part, maybe they're not able to read the labels, particularly if they're in English. So the variety of factors going on there, and then even the ones that are not illegal, I think cause some pretty bad environmental and health problems.
And we know a better way. So
yes, exactly. There are other options that get the same or better results without all the negatives. Another refrain that I've heard a lot lately is that, oh yes, organic and agroecology, that's all very nice, but we need all kinds of practices and all kinds of agriculture. And no, I don't agree with that. That's like saying we need all kinds of labor. We need slave labor. We need, it's no, we don't need all kinds of everything. We there's lots of different types of agricultural practices that we should embrace, and certainly using a diversity of practices is a good idea. But the ones that are destroying the soil and the climate and biodiversity and our water sources, we don't need those.
It makes a lot of sense.
I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but I get excited about this.
I'm curious about how you're, clearly the message is getting out there. But I also happen to know that there is a quite a large climate conference coming up here in another week or so. Will you be going to COP27 in Egypt? Will you be sharing Sustainable Harvest International's work in that forum?
I wish I was. I have been to the UN climate change COP in the past, as has our executive director Elliot. This year we had some other opportunities arise that felt like they'd be better priorities for us, where we would be bigger fish in a smaller pond. Whereas at COP, as a small nonprofit organization, it's fairly easy to get lost. Having made that decision, and now as some other organizations are asking if we'll speak on panels with them and such at the COP, I'm now second guessing myself and say, oh, maybe I should have tried to do it all and go everywhere and do everything. But I know that the movement will be well represented.
Fabulous, fabulous. And you do have to draw the line somewhere, and you can't be everywhere at once. So
yeah, with a very small staff, stretched very thin, we can only be so many places at once. And thankfully there's a lot of places now where we want to be and where we're wanted. So it's blessing and a curse, but more of a blessing.
Right, logistically a curse, but
right,
programmatically a blessing. I love
that. And we are hoping to build out our staff a little bit more so that we'll have more of that bandwidth and capacity to participate more and do more overall.
I'm really curious about you. Now you've been at this for 25 years, and what if anything has changed in the farming methods in that time? You know, we see all sorts of news about the changing climate, and certain methods maybe don't work as well, or changing weather patterns. Like, how have you had to adapt, or how are the farmers adapting to those changes?
Yeah, I guess the biggest change that I've seen has been in relation to climate change and in relation to that causing the rain patterns to be so disrupted, where the farmers used to have a pretty clear idea of when it would rain and how much and when it wouldn't rain. And that's really been seriously disrupted. And now they're planting their corn that is going to be needing the rain, and then it doesn't rain, or they're planting the vegetables that don't do well if there's too much rain, but it's raining. And so we've been putting some more focus on irrigation systems, drip irrigation, ways to ensure that the crops can get water when they need it, growing vegetables under cover. I mean, nothing fancy, just sort of a simple little roof and open sides, but it allows the farmers to control how much water is getting to those vegetables. So some simple techniques like that are part of how we've been shifting with the climate.
And is there some kind of like alumni network for the farmers who have graduated from the program? Are they communicating with each other to share, like, hey, this worked or that worked? Or are they all sort of coming back to you and saying, or are they figuring it out on their own?
Mostly, I would say they're figuring it out on their own. Many of them stay in touch with our local staff to varying degrees, and our staff stay in touch with them to some degree. Going forward, one of the ideas that we would like to think more about and possibly pilot is setting up some sort of a farmers alumni network, so that they can have more of those opportunities to share knowledge with each other, share seeds with each other, and maybe get involved with more collective marketing of their crops, since they're each growing a little bit of a lot of different things. If there was a way to aggregate those crops, that could be beneficial in the marketing. So it's something we're thinking about, but that we have not done up to this point, other than sort of sporadically.
Well, it feels like a very impressive first 25 years. And I think we are all eager to see what comes next with the Million Farm Transformation. And I have a feeling you may have to be one of our frequent flyers on the Lunch and Learn program, because I'm going to want an update. Florence, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank all of you who are joining us live, and thanks to those of you who tune in later on YouTube. We are really just so grateful for this Lunch and Learn community, and really love sharing fascinating speakers like Florence with us. So thank you all. I hope you'll all join us next week. It will be our last pre-election program. So we're going to be talking about elections, but we're going to put a different spin on it next week. We will have Sarah Squires and Kathy Buston from Disability Rights Maine with us next week to talk about their work to remove barriers to voting and to help educate and inform people about accessible voting. We cannot wait. Always good to have something productive to do with that last pre-election week anxiety. So join us next week. Look for the email later this afternoon with follow-ups today. Definitely go click through and sign up to join Sustainable Harvest International and get those updates. And thank you all for joining us. Have just a beautiful weekend, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks so much, everyone. Bye-bye.